Now, Dante Alighieri, who's this Florentine poet from the Middle Ages, his Divine Comedy is, in my opinion, one of the most important pieces of literature ever written. It is also one of the most significant of its kind. Essentially, it is a collection of three very epic poems. And when I say very epic, I don't mean it by any stretch of exaggeration as you look at the extent, and truly is very, very extensive. And these poems, they present a very detailed account of the soul's journey through the afterlife, told through Dante, who is the protagonist, as he walks through these different parts of the afterlife. Firstly, in Dante's Inferno, he describes descending through hell and the experience of the descent, and eventually ascending up the mountain of purgatory in the second poem, Purgatorio, and finally ascending all the way to heaven in the third poem, Paradiso. Now, already by the premise, I think there is, for most people, a morbid curiosity, as I think naturally many of us are fascinated and curious about what might happen to us when we die. And so Dante provides an account, a potential journey that we might all make one day. And of course, we can anticipate that most of the fascination is probably in his first poem, Dante's Inferno, the description of hell, as many people are wondering what sort of punishments will befall those who are sinners. And he is very, very creative and detailed about the sort of punishments that awaits those of us who've wronged. But what is so unique about the Divine Comedy, besides this account, is really the way it's written. Firstly, if you really were to skim through it, the first thing you'll notice is that the Divine Comedy is incredibly detailed. And why this is so unique is, if you were to compare it to other religious texts of the time, and even largely today, especially from the Christian tradition where this is largely, contextualized within, you'll notice that, for example, the Bible itself, or other texts as such, they do mention a lot about the afterlife, but they never really describe in great detail how the afterlife is like. And Dante has actually gone to do that. He's provided a very descriptive account, down to all the minute details that really makes us experience potentially the journey that he's going through, and gives us this very clear expectation of what could actually await us. And that is very unique for its time. No one, at least within the Christian tradition, has done that. But the second thing about his approach that is also very unique is he is incredibly structured, and his work is also largely underpinned by reason. So, for example, in Dante's Inferno, he goes through the different sections of hell, and we have the privilege to experience with him the different punishments that each different types of sinner go through. But what's very interesting is that he actually associates the different sins or different punishments, and they're also rather befitting. For example, those who are gluttonous, they would experience not able to engage in gluttony ever again. Instead, in lieu of that, excess sewage. And so he links different sorts of punishments and attaches them to those that befit them, and that is something that's never really been done. It is very much largely based on failures of reasons or assaults of reasons. So failure of reasons being, for example, being too gluttonous, too lustful, too envious, or that sort. And those are assault of reasons, for example, being a fraudster, and the sort of punishments that will befall you. By doing that, by being so systematic and also sort of so rigorous and in attaching reason to these different punishments, it's very clear that Dante is very much inspired by the Socratic tradition. In other words, the philosophy of Socrates, who believes himself that reason should underpin everything. Why that is so unique is that most religious texts, they are largely based on faith, and the critics of them would say largely dogmatic. But Dante has actually fused reason and religion together. It used to be that they were antagonistic from one another, and he's actually done that in the Divine Comedy, which is a very unique thing that no other figures have done. The third thing as well that is also very unique is that he has also incorporated the beliefs and the folklores of different traditions, for example, from ancient Greece and also Rome, And we see beings and deities from these different beliefs and mythologies feature themselves in the different parts of the afterlife. So what he has done is fuse these ancient beliefs into Christianity as well, making his endeavor very pan-Italian, and also you could say the underpinnings of perhaps a more global and sort of all-encompassing thought. And that is something that no other religious writers at the time had done. The third thing as well is, as you go through the Divine Comedy, you also see in different parts of the afterlife different historical figures, and they actually appear in different parts of the afterlife, from hell all the way to heaven. And by doing that, what Dante has done is he's actually provided a commentary, in a way, in a very subtle way, of the social political developments of his time. So this work of fiction is also very much a critique of the social political developments of society, and it is really done in such a beautiful way that, much more than a work of fiction, it is very much a political critique, and certainly can be viewed as such. So when you view that together, it really makes the way that he's approached writing this very different from other poets. But more than that, there's also significance in the very writings themselves. Dante has decided to write the Divine Comedy in Tuscan, in Italian. And why that is so significant is because most works of text like these were largely written in Latin at the time. They were not written in Italian. And why that is so truly unusual but yet important is because Latin was a language that was only reserved to those who were educated. And back then, not many people could afford to be educated. So it's very much viewed as a language of the elite. And so Dante has actually challenged the status quo and challenged the elitism of education by very much writing the entire brilliant work of the Divine Comedy in Italian. And because of that, many people have actually argued that he is the father of modern-day Italian, as he has more or less been promoting through this great work the usage of Italian as a key language. And we can certainly see that in its way it is also a social contribution. So when taken together, you start to really appreciate the work that is the Divine Comedy. Not only has it been this very morbid sort of description of the afterlife that is also very entertaining, it also has a lot of very unique aspects about how it's written, that it serves as something that is also very philosophical, beyond just being very religious, that it also provides a commentary on the social political development of society, and also very much a work of fiction that has promoted the development of language and the accessibility of more or less education and also being educated. And beyond that, just the imagination that it inspires has also really led to a second development in terms of the artists. All these great artists through history have actually tried to depict the Divine Comedy visually as well. So we've had great works from great artists like, for example, Botticelli, William Blake. Now, I think the best illustrations are actually done by this 18th century French illustrator, Gustave Doré. And I think that's really the best because he provides the most extensive illustrations of the Divine Comedy, which is not only very extensive, I mean, he literally depicts almost every single scene, but also he's incredibly detailed in the clarity of everything that is actually being written, that when you take into account the visual experience along with reading it, you really feel so immersed into the Divine Comedy. And it's hard to imagine reading this text itself without illustrations like these, which really provide such an enjoyable experience. Well, the story goes that when Gustave Doré presented his illustrations to the publisher back then, they were actually apprehensive and they were not keen on publishing because they said to Gustave that there's just simply too many and no one would buy it because it'd be too expensive, you need more pages. But today it's hard to imagine a Divine Comedy, especially the Gustave edition, without these illustrations. They really make the experience so immersive in a way that no other editions can. And so for these reasons, I think Divine Comedy truly is a book that most of us should read. It really does provide a very sort of humanist thought experiment, or all the things I've